Right. Well, I think like the idea of resilience maybe connotes the wrong thing. Like for some reason I hear resilience and I think of like heroic statues, like when, the face of resilience, I wanted to go like this, but that's not, I don't know what that is. That makes resilience seem like it has to be heroic. And I'm suspicious of that. I think Sherman Alexie said, I don't believe in heroes, I believe in heroic moments. And so I'm really suspicious of resilience looking like, whatever that is. Yeah.
So let's start and say your name and the work that you do, your affiliation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So my name's Elise Pepple, and the work that I do is kind of twofold in my life or with this conference.
In your life?
Yeah, so I work with resilience in the sense that I run an after-school program that is about how adolescents transition into adulthood. And the idea is that we don't really have that transition, but that we need those skills. So skills around like, how do you have a hard conversation? How do you get a job? How do you make change that you want to make? And then I also do freelance storytelling projects because I think that, especially in Alaska, but in the United States, we have this history of resource extraction. And so I look at what our untapped renewable resources are. And to me, our stories are that. So yeah, I host a radio show. I host live storytelling events with Ellen. Yeah.
Wow. So are there some ideas that have come out of the workshop so far that have really stood out for you?
Yeah, I think a couple. So today we were having one of these fish bowls, and Greg Streveler talked about playing poker. And I think a lot of times we talk about causes, and we need to do this, and inevitably this involves a they. Do this to a them, right? If they would just understand that this is right. And Greg was talking about how he plays poker with a bunch of guys who are different from him. And so to me, that's what it takes, right? It takes playing poker. It takes showing up and mixing it up. So that's one thing that came out of today. And then Joe was talking about these two beautiful examples of to me, resilience, but like creative actions. What creative actions do we want to take? And like, what are our heroic moments? And I think the question of what it takes to be resilient can be deeply personal. Like, what am I going to do? And so he told the story of this group of women in Appalachia who shaved their heads and went to the Capitol to be like the mountains that they live on, whose tops are shaved off for coal. And that's probably the thing that most touched me today. And then, of course, he brought up Tim DeChristopher and going and auctioning, bidding and bidding and bidding. And part of that story is that Tim did not know that he was going to do that, which is so beautiful, right? He knew he cared, and he didn't know what to do. And so I'm really interested in, like, what is it that each of us needs to do? And it's a surprise, right? Whether it's auctioning or shaving our heads, what is that?
So you helped folks to surface their burning question. What's your burning question?
My burning question is, how does this matter?
How does what matter?
How does this conference matter? And then how does it not matter, right? Like, we don't really matter. Like, my basic principle is that we do, but like in the grand scheme of things, we don't really matter. We're like a blink of the eye, right? And so then I guess like the other way of saying that burning question is like, how do we make it matter? How do we make matter? And to me, that's art, or creativity, and not narrowly like drawing or sculpting or taking photos, but how do we creatively engage life? That's the art I'm interested in. Question.
So, what would you like to ideally take away from this conference, this roundtable? Ideally, in an ideal world, then we'll go.
It's such a like realm. I'm an idea person, right? But what I would like to take away is not feeling like we just sat and talked about a bunch of things, not feeling like we could self-congratulate over and over again. So it's really bad to answer a question in the negative. I'll try and answer in the affirmative. I would like to take away perspectives that I don't yet have. I would like to take away some kind of space for reflection about what's my heroic or unheroic moment or action. What am I going to do? And then I think it's really important we retain most what we do, not what we say. So I would like to take away in my body what resilience is.
Can you elaborate?
Small goal.
But can you elaborate a bit more, because we talk about this a lot. Theory versus praxis. Can we talk a little bit more about that? What does that mean to you in terms of resiliency and all this stuff?
Yeah. Well, so do you mean the like scientific research piece, Ellen? Or
No, I mean in the way we use these concepts, how we apply these concepts, the talking about them versus trying to actually implement them, and how we struggle.
Yeah. What are you
Talk about that. How does that work for you? You're thinking about that. You said you like ideas, but at the same time, I know you can't live just with ideas, knowing you. So you want to elaborate a little bit on that tension or that hopeful balance?
Yeah, right. So there is a tension, I think, and I think we like our dominant paradigm is to talk about things, and it's dangerous, right? We can't even tell, right? That somehow we can't even tell that when we're talking about things, we're not actually doing anything about them. And so yeah, I mean, historically, like Aristotle talked about theory and practice. Theory, poetry, and practice. And I don't know that I'm referring to what you're asking me to refer to, but I just, we can't have one without the other. So what does that look like in my life? I guess I try to figure out like ways for practice to be engaging. So that's why storytelling events or dance parties. And I think that we look really narrowly at what that can be, right? Like I think our social services are very limited. I think we've like industrialized services, right? So there's education, and that's where all the education happens. And then there's like therapy, and that's like social workers heal shit, you know? And then there's like whatever, the people who make money. And the same sometimes with art, like art looks like this. And I guess I'm interested in a space where like the theory and practice of all those things overlap. Like to me, a great social service in Sitka would be a yenta, because there are a lot of single people, and like honestly, the quality of life would be better if like people had someone to date. So like, but there's probably not going to be like a government program for a yenta in Sitka. I think every town needs an awesome coffee shop, bar, something with great food that feels welcoming and great drink, you know? So, and that's a practice.
Plato said in theory and practice are the same. In practice, they're not. So you do a lot of group work and group facilitation, and we've heard a lot about and keep hearing a lot about how important and essential that is to get people engaged and solve these gnarly problems. Have you noticed some things that are essential components for making that work?
Yeah. It's okay to fail. Also, BTW, we're probably not going to solve the problems. Like, that's not really the point. So, well, I mean, it is, but we're operating on this scale that is not human, right? So we talk about these problems as though we can solve them because we like to think we can solve everything. But it's kind of a fool's task. So I guess the way I like to look at these problems to be solved is like, what are experiments in dealing with them differently? So like, we've tried the old ways, right? We know how that looks, so it's boring. So like, let's just experiment with how to work with these problems differently. And then I'd say I'm not sure how that works best. I think what I'm learning more and more is that it's modeling that it's all okay. So like every range of emotion is okay. Like tears are okay, laughter is okay, being serious. And not even that it's okay, because that sounds like forced, but it's like somehow if we can facilitate in a space for all people to know they can be themselves, more happens or something happens. And I don't think anything happens until people feel like they can be there as themselves. And I think we do when we're trying to solve problems. I mean, if children watched us, they would think we looked hilarious because we sit down as adults and we're like, okay, now we're gonna solve the world's problems, you know? And it's like, that looks really funny. And then we get so serious that I don't know that there's any ventilation, right? And inspiration comes from, you know, like air. That with the word inspiration, there has to be like some air there. So how is there any inspiration if we all like, exactly. Okay, now we must solve the world's problems. It's like
You could say the most insightful thing.
right, and then there's that pressure. Yeah.
So here's a little exercise. If you had a 14-year-old in front of you, and somehow magically you knew that that person was going to go on and be very influential in the world, what advice would you give them?
Yeah, so that could be any 14-year-old or 40-year-old. I would believe that that's true.
Anytime, we can edit out a thinking pause.
So I think we need each person exactly as they are. So whoever that 14-year-old is, whether they're fucked up or addicted or depressed or perfect or smart or not smart or love music, they are exactly who we need. And so I guess I would just say I trust who you are. It's not advice. I'm too young to give advice.
No, you're not. But also, tie the trust who you are to resiliency. I know it sounds kind of artificial, but how does that connect to resiliency? Or resistance? Or regeneration? Or something else? I mean, what does that build? If we learn to encourage and trust people to be who they are, and to not feel like this whole thing about we're going to give the younger generation advice.
Yeah, honestly, I think that is the only way resilience happens, right? I'm just thinking of some stories about that.
Tell us a story.
Well, I was sitting with a group of people not talking seriously about resilience, but it was a group of people who were going out camping together. And this one guy's like, why am I doing this, right? And because everyone was camping to kind of like mark a transition in their life. And I think about that moment, if this guy felt like he had to be a certain thing, he had to be brave, I don't know that he would have been there, and I don't know that the group would have been there together, but he could just say, I don't know what I'm doing, this sucks, I don't want to go camping, why am I here? And that's real. So I don't know how resilience can happen without people being able to be real. I guess that's.
So this, the rituals of coming of age is something you know something about and
Yeah.
delved into, but we don't have them in our society so much.
Yeah.
What's the consequences of that, and how can we get them back, or how can we develop those rituals beyond, say, just getting a driver's license?
Yeah. I don't know that I know about them, but I care about them. And I think it's two things. I think it's this first piece where there's so much noise, but like really each person is their best like tuning fork for knowing. So how do we cultivate people trusting themselves? And then I think the other piece with coming of age is having people see you, right? And saying, like, I see that you are an amazing whatever you are, right? And so I think it does happen in some places. There's someone here who in my life was that person when I was in my 20s and said, hey, I noticed that you're paying attention to these questions, and said that's a beautiful thing. And no one ever said that to me in my life, you know, and that mattered. So it's like, I guess it's a combination of like really honoring who people are and trusting who they are.
And, have you been involved in creating rituals? This camping one sounded like a good one.
Yeah, I'm trying to avoid talking about how I'm involved in. Yeah, I feel like, so it's another piece of storytelling, right?
Yeah.
There's storytelling in a community, and then there's each person's story. And to me, like, that story matters. And so I'm trying to learn about the rituals that help us to thrive, or at least the ones that feel to me like they help us to thrive. And I want to know more about them. So one way is through rituals.
Anything else you'd care to add?
I've been talking a lot. No, I don't.